Hello and good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well this evening. Welcome to the live reading of Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy, Chapter 7 on Truth. So I'm sure this promises to be an excellent chapter. Aldous Huxley talking about truth, using all of the quotes that he often brings in the Perennial Philosophy. There's always many quotes to enjoy and ponder on and take our time to chew, and I don't think chapter 7's any different, and I don't think the rest of the book's any different. So yeah, I very much enjoy the quotes, and you really have to ponder on the passages and take it slow and, like I say, chew them so that you can digest them. But this evening we will be reading chapter 7 on truth, and speaking of quotes, Huxley begins chapter 7 with just that, from Meister Eckhart. Why dost thou prate of God? Whatever thou sayest of him is untrue. And Huxley says, in religious literature, the word truth is used indiscriminately in at least three distinct and very different senses. Thus, it is sometimes treated as a synonym for fact, as when it is affirmed that God is truth, meaning that he is the primordial reality. But this is clearly not the meaning of the word in such a phrase as worshipping God in spirit and in truth. Here it is obvious truth signifies direct apprehension of spiritual fact, as opposed to second-hand knowledge about reality, formulated in sentences and accepted on authority or because an argument from previously granted postulates was logically convincing. Hello there, Google. Another terrific chapter. Glad you could make it. It's lovely to have you here. And finally, there is the more ordinary meaning of the word, as in such a sentence as, this statement is the truth, where we mean to assert that the verbal symbols of which the statement is composed correspond to the facts to which it refers. When Eckhart writes that whatever thou sayest of God is untrue, he is not affirming that all theological statements are false. Insofar as there can be any correspondence between human symbols and divine fact, some theological statements are as true as it is possible for us to make them. Himself a theologian, Eckhart would certainly have admitted this, but besides being a theologian, Eckhart was a mystic. And being a mystic, he understood very vividly what the modern semanticist is so busily and also so unsuccessfully trying to drum into contemporary minds, namely that words are not the same as things, and that a knowledge of words about facts is in no sense equivalent to a direct and immediate apprehension of the facts themselves. What Eckhart actually asserts is this. Whatever one may say about God can never in any circumstances be the truth in the first two meanings of that much abused and ambiguous word. By implication, St. Thomas Aquinas was saying exactly the same thing when, after his experience of infused contemplation, he refused to go on with his theological work, declaring that everything he had written up to that time was as mere straw compared to the immediate knowledge which had been vouchsafed to him. So that's very interesting, isn't it? St. Thomas Aquinas had written many works, theological treatises on God and religion, and once he had a certain experience, he declared that they were mere straw compared with the immediate knowledge of his experience. 200 years earlier in Baghdad, the great Mohammedan theologian Al-Ghazali had similarly turned from the consideration of truths about God to the contemplation and direct apprehension of truth the fact, from the purely intellectual discipline of the philosophers to the moral and spiritual discipline of the Sufis. The moral of all this is obvious. Whenever we hear or read about truth, we should always pause long enough to ask ourselves in which of the three senses listed above the word is at the moment being used. By taking this simple precaution, and to take it as a genuinely virtuous act of intellectual honesty, we shall save ourselves a great deal of disturbing and quite unnecessary mental confusion. It is fascinating truth. And yeah, even the first few minutes where he distinguishes the three different truths, it really is fascinating. Gives a lot to ponder, right? Google. Okay, so now we come to many quotes. We're going to have a lot of quotes for a moment, and then Huxley will expand upon them. So this first quote is from Dai-o Kokushi, a clearly Japanese individual. Wishing to entice the blind, the Buddha playfully let words escape from his golden mouth. Heaven and earth are filled ever since with entangling briars. And here we have another quote from Huineng, I think. There is nothing true anywhere. The true is nowhere to be found. If you say you see the true, this seeing is not the true one. When the true is left to itself, there is nothing false in it, for it is mind itself. When mind in itself is not liberated from the false, there is nothing true. Nowhere is the true to be found. End quote. And like I say, that's Huineng. The next quote is from the Sutra Lamkara. The truth indeed has never been preached by the Buddha, seeing that one has to realize it within oneself. And this next quote is from Lao Tzu, a very famous one from Lao Tzu. The further one travels, the less one knows. And we have another quote from Wu Cheng-en. There's a book called Monkey, I think, from this author. I think this quote comes from Monkey, and it's on the reading list for the live reads if you're interested. Listen to this, shouted Monkey. After all the trouble we had getting here from China, and after you specially ordered that we were to be given the scriptures, Ananda and Kasyapa made a fraudulent delivery of goods. They gave us blank copies to take away. I ask you, what is the good of that to us? You needn't shout, said the Buddha, smiling. As a matter of fact, it is such blank scrolls as these that are the true scriptures. But I quite see that the people of China are too foolish and ignorant to believe this, so there is nothing for it but to give them copies with some writing on. What a quote from Wu Cheng-en. Another quote from Yoka Daishi. The philosophers indeed are clever enough, but wanting in wisdom. As to the others, they are either ignorant or puerile. They take an empty fist as containing something real, and the pointing finger as the object pointed at. Because the finger is adhered to as though it were the moon, all their efforts are lost. And another quote from the Diamond Sutra. What is known as the teaching of the Buddha is not the teaching of the Buddha. Work that one out. What is known as the teaching of the Buddha is not the teaching of the Buddha. Okay. And the last one, I believe, from Shitu. What is the ultimate teaching of Buddhism? You won't understand it until you have it. Wonderful, wonderful. Now back to Huxley. The subject matter of the Perennial Philosophy is the nature of eternal spiritual reality, but the language in which it must be formulated was developed for the purpose of dealing with phenomena in time. That is why, in all these formulations, we find an element of paradox. The nature of truth, the fact, cannot be described by means of verbal symbols that do not adequately correspond to it. At best, it can be hinted at in terms of non sequiturs and contradictions. To these unavoidable paradoxes, some spiritual writers have chosen to add deliberate and calculated enormities of language, hard sayings, exaggerations, ironic or humorous extravagances, designed to startle and shock the reader out of that self-satisfied complacency which is the original sin of the intellect. Of this second kind of paradox, the masters of Taoism and Zen Buddhism were particularly fond. The latter indeed made use of paralogisms and even of nonsense as a device for taking the kingdom of heaven by violence. Aspirants to the life of perfection were encouraged to practice discursive meditation on some completely non-logical formula, The result was a kind of reductio ad absurdum of the whole self-centered and world-centered discursive process, a sudden breaking through from reason in the language of scholastic philosophy to intuitive intellect, capable of a genuine insight into the divine ground of all being. This method strikes us as odd and eccentric, but the fact remains that it worked to the extent of producing in many persons the final metanoia, or transformation of consciousness and character. And we came across that word, that metanoia, some chapters ago, I believe. Zen's use of almost comic extravagance to emphasize the philosophic truths it regarded as most important is well illustrated in the first of the extracts cited above. We are not intended seriously to imagine that an avatar preaches in order to play a practical joke on the human race. But meanwhile, what the author has succeeded in doing is to startle us out of our habitual complacency about the homemade verbal universe in which we normally do most of our living. Words are not facts, and still less are they the primordial fact. If we take them too seriously, we shall lose our way in a forest of entangling briars. But if, on the contrary, we don't take them seriously enough, we shall remain unaware that there is a way to lose or a goal to be reached. If the enlightened did not preach, there would be no deliverance for anyone. But because human minds and human languages are what they are, this necessary and indispensable preaching is beset with dangers. The history of all the religions is similar in one important respect. Some of their adherents are enlightened and delivered because they have chosen to react appropriately to the words which the founders have let fall. Others achieve a partial salvation by reacting with partial appropriateness. Yet others harm themselves and their fellows by reacting with a total inappropriateness, either ignoring the words altogether or, more often, taking them too seriously and treating them as though they were identical with the facts to which they refer. Very good. Very good. So he's saying here that there's three ways to react to the human language and the teachings from the religions. You'll be enlightened and delivered if you choose to react appropriately. You'll achieve partial salvation by reacting with partial appropriateness, and you'll harm yourself if you react with inappropriateness. Very good quotes there, because I believe that's what's happened to a lot of the world's religions. They've been degraded because people don't understand what the founders, if you like, the forefathers, the scriptures were saying. That words are at once indispensable and, in many cases, fatal has been recognized by all the exponents of the perennial philosophy. Thus, Jesus spoke of himself as bringing into the world something even worse than briars, a sword. St. Paul distinguished between the letter that kills and the spirit that gives life. And throughout the centuries that followed, the masters of Christian spirituality have found it necessary to harp again and again upon a theme which has never been outdated, because homo loquax, some Latin phrase, I don't know the term, oh, here we go, the talking animal. The homo loquax, the talking animal, is still as naively delighted by his chief accomplishment, still as helplessly the victim of his own words as he was when the Tower of Babel was being built. Damn. The talking animal. That's what, if you read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, he refers to us, as Homo sapiens. Recent years have seen the publication of numerous works on semantics and of an ocean of nationalistic, racialistic, and militaristic propaganda. Never have so many capable writers warned mankind against the dangers of wrong speech, and never have words been used more recklessly by politicians or taken more seriously by the public. The fact is surely proof enough that, under changing forms, the old problems remain what they always were. Urgent, unsolved, and to all appearances, insoluble. So now we're coming to some more quotes. More quotes. The first quote from St. John of the Cross, quote, "All that the imagination can imagine and the reason conceive and understand in this life is not and cannot be approximate means of union with God." And that's St. John of the Cross. And now another quote. "Jejune and barren speculations may unfold the plicatures of truth's garment, but they cannot discover her lovely face." And that quote is from John Smith, the Platonist. Another quote. "In all faces is shown the face of faces, veiled and in a riddle. Howbeit, unveiled it is not seen, until, above all faces, a man enter into a certain secret and mystic silence, where there is no knowing or concept of a face. This mist, cloud, darkness, or ignorance into which he that seeketh the face entereth, when he goeth beyond all knowledge or concept, is the state below which thy face cannot be found, except veiled. But that very darkness revealeth thy face to be there beyond all veils. Hence I observe how needful it is for me to enter into the darkness, and to admit the coincidence of opposites beyond all the grasp of reason, and there to seek the truth where impossibility meeteth us." And that quote is from Nicholas of Cusa. Hey King Arjun, welcome, good evening. And we have another quote. "As the Godhead is nameless, and all naming is alien to him, so also the soul is nameless, for it is here the same as God." And that's very like Bhagavad Gita. That's Meister Eckhart. Another quote. "God being as he is inaccessible, do not rest in the consideration of objects perceptible to the senses and comprehended by the understanding. This is to be content with what is less than God. So doing, you will destroy the energy of the soul, which is necessary for walking with him." And that's a quote from St. John of the Cross. "To find or know God in reality by any outward proofs or by anything but by God himself made manifest and self-evident in you will never be your case either here or hereafter. For neither God nor heaven nor hell nor the devil nor the flesh can be any otherwise knowable in you or by you but by their own existence and manifestation in you. And all pretended knowledge of any of these things beyond and without this self-evident sensibility of their birth within you is only such knowledge of them as the blind man hath of the light that hath never entered into him." And that one quote is from William Law. And we get back to Huxley for a brief moment. "What follows is a summary by an eminent scholar of the Indian doctrines concerning jhana, the liberating knowledge of Brahman, or the divine ground." And this quote comes from Rudolf Otto. "Jhana is eternal, is general, is necessary, and is not a personal knowledge of this man or that man. It is there as knowledge in the Atman itself, and lies there hidden under all avidya, ignorance, irremovable though it may be, obscured, unprovable, because self-evident, needing no proof, because itself giving to all proof the ground of possibility." These sentences come near to Eckhart's knowledge and to the teaching of Augustine on the eternal truth in the soul, which itself immediately certain is the ground of all certainty and is a possession not of A or B, but of the soul. And like I said, that's from Rudolf Otto. Back to Huxley. "The science of aesthetics is not the same as, nor even approximate means to, the practice and appreciation of the arts. How can one learn to have an eye for pictures or to become a good painter? Certainly not by reading Benedetto Croce. One learns to paint by painting, and one learns to appreciate pictures by going to picture galleries and looking at them. But this is not to say that Croce and his fellows have wasted their time. We should be grateful to them for their labours in building up a system of thought, by means of which the immediately apprehended significance and value of art can be assessed in the light of general knowledge related to other facts and experience, and in this way and to this extent explained. What is true of aesthetics is also true of theology. Theological speculation is available insofar as it enables those who have had immediate experience of various aspects of God to form intelligible ideas about the nature of the divine ground and of their own experience of the ground in relation to other experiences. And when a coherent system of theology has been worked out, it is useful insofar as it convinces those who study it that there is nothing inherently self-contradictory about the postulate of the divine ground, and that, for those who are ready to fulfill certain conditions, the postulate may become a realized fact. In no circumstances, however, can the study of theology or the mind's assent to theological propositions take the place of what Law calls the birth of God within. For theory is not practice, and words are not the things for which they stand. I think I'll reread that final sentence, very powerful, very Platonic, the first part. For theory is not practice, and words are not the things for which they stand. We have another quote here from Abbot John Chapman. Quote, "Theology as we know it has been formed by the great mystics, especially St. Augustine and St. Thomas. Plenty of other great theologians, especially St. Gregory and St. Bernard, even down to Suarez, would not have had such insight without mystic super-knowledge." And again, that's Abbot John Chapman. Back to Huxley. Against this we must see Dr. Tennant's view, namely, that religious experience is something real and unique, but does not add anything to the experiencer's knowledge of ultimate reality, and must always be interpreted in terms of an idea of God derived from other sources. A study of the facts would suggest that both these opinions are to some degree correct. The facts of mystical insight, together with the facts of what is taken to be historic revelation, are rationalized in terms of general knowledge and become the basis of a theology. And reciprocally, an existing theology in terms of general knowledge exercises a profound influence upon those who have undertaken the spiritual life, causing them, if it is low, to be content with a low form of experience, if it is high, to reject as inadequate the experience of any form of reality having characteristics incompatible with those of the God described in the books. Thus, mystics make theology, and theology makes mystics. Hello, Laura. I'm glad to have you here. It's lovely to see you. I hope you're doing well. Again, another sentence that wants repeating. Thus, mystics make theology, and theology make mystics. A person who gives assent to untrue dogma, or who pays all his attention and allegiance to one true dogma in a comprehensive system, while neglecting the others, as many Christians concentrate exclusively on the humanity of the second person of the Trinity and ignore the Father and the Holy Ghost, runs the risk of limiting in advance his direct apprehension of reality. In religion, as in natural science, experience is determined only by experience. It is fatal to prejudice it, to compel it to fit the mould imposed by a theory which either does not correspond to the facts at all, or corresponds to only some of the facts. Do not strive to seek after the true, writes a Zen master, only cease to cherish opinions. It's crazy for me reading it, how similar. That quote there, do not strive to seek after the true, only cease to cherish opinions, and that's a Zen saying from a Zen master. It could be taken out of a Platonic dialogue. And that's why I love the Perennial Philosophy, because you could be reading Plato and read something very similar to that sentence. So, yeah, that's why I love the Perennial Philosophy, because it's Zen or Plato or Buddhism, you know, it's all there in everything, and it's wonderful. There is only one way to cure the results of belief in a false or incomplete theology, and it is the same as the only known way of passing from belief in even the truest theology to knowledge or primordial fact, selflessness, docility, openness to the datum of eternity. Opinions are things which we make and can therefore understand, formulate and argue about, but to rest in the consideration of objects perceptible to the sense or comprehended by the understanding is to be content, in the words of St. John of the Cross, with what is less than God. Unitive knowledge of God is possible only to those who have ceased to cherish opinions, even opinions that are as true as it is possible for verbalized abstractions to be. I believe so, Laura. I believe it is all one. You're right. And there's Huxley talking in a Christian sense and quoting the Zen master to emphasize his Christian point. So it is fascinating. We come to another quote by Meister Eckhart. Up then, noble soul, put on thy jumping shoes which are intellect and love, and overleap the worship of thy mental powers, overleap thine understanding and spring into the heart of God, into his hiddenness where thou art hidden from all creatures. Another beauty. That's Meister Eckhart, and this quote comes from the Lankavatara Sutra. With the lamp of word and discrimination, one must go beyond word and discrimination and enter upon the path of realization. Back to Huxley. The word intellect is used by Eckhart in the scholastic sense of immediate intuition. Intellect and reason, says Aquinas, are not two powers but distinct as the perfect from the imperfect. The intellect means an intimate penetration of truth, the reason, inquiry and discourse. It is by following and then abandoning the rational and emotional path of word and discrimination that one is enabled to enter upon the intellectual or intuitive path of realization. And yet, in spite of the warnings pronounced by those who, through selflessness, have passed from letter to spirit and from theory to immediate knowledge, the organized Christian churches have persisted in the fatal habit of mistaking means for ends. The verbal statements of theology's more or less adequate rationalizations of experience have been taken too seriously and treated with the reverence that is due only to the fact that they are intended to describe. It has been fancied that souls are saved if assent is given to what is locally regarded as the correct formula, lost if it is withheld. The two words, philoque, may not have been the sole cause of the schism between the Eastern and Western churches, but they were unquestionably the pretext and casus belli. I don't know Latin, so I can't translate. The overvaluation of words and formulae may be regarded as a special case of that overvaluation of the things of time, which is so fatally characteristic of historic Christianity. To know the truth as fact, and to know it unitively, in spirit and in thus as immediate apprehension, this is deliverance, in this standeth our eternal life. To be familiar with the verbalized truths which symbolically correspond to truth as fact, insofar as it can be known in or inferred from truth as immediate apprehension or truth as historic revelation, this is not salvation, but merely the study of a special branch of philosophy. Even the most ordinary experience of thing or event in time can never be fully or adequately described in words. The experience of seeing the sky or having neuralgia is incommunicable. The best we can do is to say blue or pain, in the hope that those who hear us may have had experiences similar to our own and so be able to supply their own version of the meaning. God, however, is not a thing or event in time, and the time-bound words, which cannot do justice even to temporal matters, are even more inadequate to the intrinsic nature and our own unitive experience of that which belongs to an incommensurably different order. To suppose that people can be saved by studying and giving assent to formulae is like supposing that one can get to Timbuktu by poring over a map of Africa. Maps are symbols, and even the best of them are inaccurate and perfect symbols. But to anyone who really wants to reach a given destination, a map is indispensably useful as indicating the direction in which the traveller should set out and the roads which he must take. So that's a great analogy, isn't it? Like, you're not going to get anywhere staring at the map. You have to go out on the journey, you have to begin your path. And yeah, I suppose all of the theological works of Christianity and the Buddhist scriptures and the Bhagavad Gita and the Hindu stuff, and I think that's maybe why I enjoyed the George Gurdjieff's work, because it's eminently practical. He gives you things to experience and experiment and verify for yourself. Laura asks a very interesting question. Have you ever had an experience of union or realization? Now, I don't really know how to answer it, but I'll answer it as honestly as I can. For many years, I was studying these things, with a lot of dedication. I was sort of intensely focused on not only studying the books, but trying to realize what the books have to teach. And so for all of those years, like Huxley's saying, I don't know for myself if it was just because I read the book and thought that's what the book says, or if it was actually some real legitimate experience. But I would say that when I read certain books or certain philosophers or certain spiritual scriptures, I sort of do see the world as much more unified. Like if I read the Bhagavad Gita, I can start seeing people not as their personalities and their bodies, but as the soul, like it describes in the Bhagavad Gita. And then if I read Gurdjieff, and then I can start, following through. But I think Laura's teasing us with you're teasing us, Laura. I think you should get it in the comments so I can share it with everyone, because I think these things are real. That's one thing I do believe. And let's say they're very powerful, and it's sort of, it's difficult to talk about, isn't it? We need Huxley. Let's get back to Huxley, and hopefully he can describe it for us. And Laura's going to share her story. In later Buddhist philosophy, we've been distracted again. Yes, Laura, the Celestine Prophecy is very powerful. When I first began my journey, that's one of the first books I read. And I think, you're probably something similar to me, that when you're looking out for the synchronicities and the signs, they come abundantly. They really start heating up and becoming very powerful. So yes, I've also had similar experiences with the signs and the synchronicities. So Celestine Prophecies on the shelf for the live read, so that should come some point in the future. Back to Huxley. In later Buddhist philosophy, words are regarded as one of the prime determining factors in the creative evolution of human beings. In this philosophy, 5 categories of being are recognized: name, appearance, discrimination, right knowledge, and suchness. The first 3 are related for evil, the last 2 for good. Appearances are discriminated by the sense organs, then reified by naming, so that the words are taken for things and symbols are used as the measure of reality. According to this view, language is a main source of the sense of separateness and the blasphemous idea of individual self-sufficiency, with their inevitable corollaries of greed, envy, lust for power, anger, and cruelty. and from these evil passions there springs in the necessity of an indefinitely protracted and repeated separate existence under the same self-perpetuated conditions of craving and infatuation. The only escape is through a creative act of the will, assisted by Buddha grace, leading through selfness to right knowledge, which consists, among other things, in a proper appraisal of names, appearances, and discrimination. In and through right knowledge, one emerges from the infatuating delusion of I, me, and mine, and resisting the temptation to deny the world in a state of premature and one-sided ecstasy, or to affirm it by living like the average sensual man, one comes at last to the transfiguring awareness that samsara and nirvana are one, to the unitive apprehension of pure suchness, the ultimate ground, which can only be indicated, never adequately described in verbal symbols. Yeah, I think that's a spam, Laura, so I don't know what Namdi's saying, or maybe he is. Maybe I'm being too quick to judge there. I won't delete that one because he could be trying to say something, but I don't understand it. In connection with the Mahayanist view that words play an important and even creative part in the evolution of unregenerate human nature, we may mention Hume's arguments against the reality of causation. These arguments start from the postulate that all events are loose and separate from one another and proceed with faultless logic to a conclusion that makes complete nonsense of all organized thought or purposive action. The fallacy, as Professor Stout has pointed out, lies in the preliminary postulate. And when we ask ourselves what it was that induced Hume to make this odd and quite unrealistic assumption that events are loose and separate, we see that his only reason for flying in the face of immediate experience was the fact that things and happenings are symbolically represented in our thought by nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and that these words are in effect loose and separate from one another in a way which the events and things they stand for quite obviously are not. Taking words as the measure of things, instead of using things as the measure of words, Hume imposed the discrete and, so to say, pointilliste pattern of language upon the continuum of actual experience, with the impossibly paradoxical result with which we are all familiar. Hello, Joanne. Good evening. I hope you're doing well and had a nice relaxing weekend. Most human beings are not philosophers and care not at all for consistency in thought or action. Thus, in some circumstances, they take it for granted that events are not loose and separate, but coexist or follow one another within the organized and organizing field of a cosmic whole. But on other occasions, where the opposite view is more nearly in accord with their passions or interests, they adopt, all unconsciously, the Humean position and treat events as though they were as independent of one another as the rest of the world, I should say that again because I've messed that bit up. We have to go back a bit. Excuse me. Thanks, Joanne. It was lovely. It's glad to be back, though. As fun as it was on holiday, I'm glad to be back live reading with you guys. But on other occasions, where the opposite view is more nearly in accord with their passions or interests, they adopt, all unconsciously, the Humean position and treat events as though they were as independent of one another and the rest of the world as the words by which they are symbolized. This is generally true of all occurrences involving I, me, and mine. Reifying the loose and separate names, we regard the things as also loose and separate, not subject to law, not involved in the network of relationships by which in fact they are so obviously bound up with their physical, social, and spiritual environment. We regard as absurd the idea that there is no causal process in nature and no organic connection between events and things in the lives of other people. But at the same time, we accept as axiomatic the notion that our own sacred ego is loose and separate from the universe, a law unto itself, above the moral dharma, and even, in many respects, above the natural law of causality. Both in Buddhism and Catholicism, monks and nuns were encouraged to avoid the personal pronoun and to speak of themselves in terms of circumlocutions that clearly indicated their real relationship with the cosmic reality and their fellow creatures. The precaution was a wise one. Our responses to familiar words are conditioned reflexes. By changing the stimulus, we can do something to change the response. No Pavlov bell, no salivation, no harping on words like me and mine, no purely automatic and unreflecting egotism. When a monk speaks of himself not as I, but as this sinner or this unprofitable servant, he tends to stop taking his loose and separate selfhood for granted and makes himself aware of his real organic relationship with God and his neighbors. In practice, words are used for other purposes than for making statements about facts. Very often they are used rhetorically, in order to arouse the passions and direct the will towards some course of action regarded as desirable. And sometimes, too, they are used poetically, that is to say, they are used in such a way that besides making a statement about real or imaginary things and events, and besides appealing rhetorically to the will and the passions, they cause the reader to be aware that they are beautiful. Beauty in art or nature is a matter of relationships between things, not in themselves intrinsically beautiful. There is nothing beautiful, for example, about the vocables time or syllable. But when they are used in such a phrase as to the last syllable of recorded time, the relationship between the sound of the component words, between our ideas of the things for which they stand, and between the overtones of association with which each word and the phrase as a whole are charged, is apprehended by direct and immediate intuition as being beautiful. And that was quite a beautiful sentence there from old Huxley. He's not bad himself, is he, Huxley? About the rhetorical use of words, nothing much need be said. There is rhetoric for good causes and there is rhetoric for bad causes. Rhetoric which is tolerably true to facts as well as emotionally moving, and rhetoric which is unconsciously or deliberately a lie. To learn to discriminate between the different kinds of rhetoric is an essential part of intellectual morality. And intellectual morality is as necessary a precondition of the spiritual life as is the control of the will and the guard of heart and tongue. We have now to consider a more difficult problem. How should the poetical use of words be related to the life of the spirit? And of course, what applies to the poetical use of words applies equally to the pictorial use of pigments, the musical use of sounds, the sculptural use of clay or stone, in a word, to all the arts. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. But unfortunately, Keats failed to specify in which of its principal meanings he was using the word truth. I intend to, Laura. I will, anyone who is a patron over on the Patreon book club community, the link's in the description, I do intend to start doing live Q&As. So I don't, but I do intend to, and they won't be about specific books. They'll just be very general discussion about all the books that are in the syllabus, if you're interested in the syllabus. So yes, I will be doing some live chats this year. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. But unfortunately, Keats failed to specify in which of its principal meanings he was using the word truth. Some critics have assumed that he was using it in the third of the senses listed at the opening of this section, and have therefore dismissed the aphorism as nonsensical. Zn plus H2SO4 equals ZnSO4 plus H2. This is a truth in the third sense of the word, and manifestly this truth is not identical with beauty. But no less manifestly, Keats was not talking about this kind of truth. He was using the word primarily in its first sense as a synonym for fact, and secondarily with the significance attached to it in the Johannine phrase to worship God in truth. His sentence, therefore, carries two meanings. Beauty is the primordial fact, and the primordial fact is beauty, the principle of all particular beauties. And beauty is an immediate experience, and this immediate experience is identical with beauty as principle, beauty as primordial fact. The first of these statements is fully in accord with the doctrines of the Perennial Philosophy. Among the trinities in which the ineffable one makes itself manifest is the trinity of the good, the true, and the beautiful. We perceive beauty in the harmonious intervals between the parts of a whole. In this context, the divine ground might be paradoxically defined as pure interval, independent of what is separated and harmonized within the totality. Laura, if you're on Patreon, if you're a patron already, just send me a message. We can discuss. We can discuss through the app. With Keats's statement in its secondary meaning, the exponents of the Perennial Philosophy would certainly disagree. The experience of beauty in art or in nature may be qualitatively akin to the immediate unitive experience of the divine ground or Godhead, but it is not the same as that experience, and the particular beauty fact experienced, though partaken in some sort of the divine nature, is at several removes from the Godhead. The poet, the nature lover, the aesthete are granted apprehensions of reality analogous to those vouchsafed to the selfless contemplative, but because they have not troubled to make themselves perfectly selfless, they are incapable of knowing the divine beauty in its fullness, as it is in itself. The poet is born with the capacity of arranging words in such a way that something of the quality of the graces and inspirations he has received can make itself felt to other human beings in the white spaces, so to speak, between the lines of his verse. This is a great and precious gift, but if the poet remains content with his gift, if he persists in worshipping the beauty in art and nature without going on to make himself capable through selflessness of apprehending beauty as it is in the divine ground, then he is only an idolater. True, his idolatry is among the highest of which human beings are capable, but an idolatry nonetheless it remains. We come to another quote. Join in, Joanne, and once we get a few more, I'm going to do a video soon about the Patreon, because I've built out the syllabus. Before there was only one level. I may as well talk about a bit as we're people in the chat are talking about Patreon. It started off as just one level, books of introduction to spirituality, but now I've built it out to 6 levels. So there's 6 levels of the syllabus and many, many books that you can read or, find through the syllabus and then read yourself and then come onto the Q&As or in the chat and discuss. So the value is increasing, and hopefully once we start doing these live Q&As, hopefully you guys will enjoy it even more and we'll get more connected. So yeah, come over guys, and we'll do one of those soon to start it off. Okay, here we go. A quote. The experience of beauty is pure, self-manifested, compounded equally of joy and consciousness, free from admixture of any other perception, the very twin brother of mystical experience, and the very life of it is supersensuous wonder. It is enjoyed by those who are competent thereto in identity, just as the form of God is itself the joy with which it is recognized. And that quote is from Vishvanatha. What follows is the last composition of a Zen nun who had been in her youth a great beauty and an accomplished poetess. I think I've heard of this one. This is a quote from Ryu Nen. 66 times have these eyes beheld the changing scenes of autumn. I have said enough about moonlight. Ask me no more. Only listen to the voice of pines and cedars when no winds stir. The silence under windless trees is what Mallarmé would call a crunent musicienne, or musicienne. But whereas the music for which the poet listened was merely aesthetic and imaginative, it was to pure suchness that the self-noted the self-noted contemplative was laying herself open. Be still and know that I am God. So now we have some more quotes. The first quote is from Hui Neng. The truth is to be lived, it is not to be merely pronounced with the mouth. There is really nothing to argue about in this teaching. Any arguing is sure to go against the intent of it. Doctrines given up to controversy and argumentation lead of themselves to birth and death. That's Hui Neng. Another quote. Away then with the fictions and workings of discursive reason, either for or against Christianity. They are only the wanton spirit of the mind, whilst ignorant of God and insensible of its own nature and condition. Death and life are the only things in question. Life is God living and working in the soul. Death is the soul living and working according to the sense and reason of bestial flesh and blood. Both this life and this death are of their own growth, growing from their own seed within us, not as busy reason talks and directs, but as the heart turns either to the one or to the other. And that quote's from William Law. Another quote. Can I explain the friend to one for whom he is no friend? And that's Jalaluddin Rumi. And another quote from Rumi. When a mother cries to her sucking babe, come, O son, I am thy mother, does the child answer, O mother, show a proof that I shall find comfort in taking thy milk? And that's Jalaluddin Rumi. And this last quote is from Chuang Tzu. Great truths do not take hold of the hearts of the masses, and now, as all the world is in error, how shall I, though I know the true path, how shall I guide? If I know that I cannot succeed and yet try to force success, this would be but another source of error. Better then to desist and strive no more. But if I do not strive, who will? Back to Huxley. Between the horns of Chuang Tzu's dilemma, there is no way but that of love, peace and joy. Only those who manifest their possession, in however small a measure, of the fruits of the Spirit can persuade others that the life of the Spirit is worth living. Argument and controversy are almost useless. In many cases, indeed, they are positively harmful. But this, of course, is a thing that clever men with a gift for syllogisms and sarcasm find it peculiarly hard to admit. Milton, no doubt, genuinely believed that he was working for truth, righteousness, and the glory of God by exploding in torrents of learned scurrility against the enemies of his favourite dictator and his favourite brand of nonconformity. In actual fact, of course, he and the other controversialists of the 16th and 17th centuries did nothing but harm to the cause of true religion, for which, on one side or the other, they fought with an equal learning and ingenuity, and with the same foul-mouthed temperance of language. The successive controversies went on with occasional lucid intervals for about 200 years, Papists arguing with anti-Papists, Protestants with other Protestants, Jesuits with Quietists, and Janinists. When the noise finally died down, Christianity, which like any other religion can survive only if it manifests the fruits of the Spirit, was all but dead. The real religion of most educated Europeans was now nationalistic idolatry. During the 18th century, this change to idolatry seemed, after the atrocities committed in the name of Christianity by Wallenstein and Tilly, to be a change for the better. This was because the ruling classes were determined that the horrors of the wars of religion should not be repeated, and therefore deliberately tempered power politics with gentlemanliness. Symptoms of gentlemanliness, that's a funny word, isn't it? Gentlemanliness. Symptoms of gentlemanliness can still be observed in the Napoleonic and Crimean Wars. But the national Molochs were steadily devouring the 18th century ideal. During the First and Second World Wars, we have witnessed the total elimination of the old checks and self-restraints. The consequences of political idolatry now display themselves without the smallest mitigation, either of humanistic honor and etiquette or of transcendental religion. By its internecine quarrels over words, forms of organization, money and power, historic Christianity consummated the work of self-destruction to which its excessive preoccupation with things in time had from the first so tragically committed it. And here we have two quotes from Jalaluddin Rumi. Quote, "Sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Cleverness is mere opinion. Bewilderment is intuition." Quote, another one. "Reason is like an officer when the king appears. The officer then loses his power and hides himself. Reason is the shadow cast by God. God is the sun." And that's a very nice quote again there from Rumi. Back to Huxley. "Non-rational creatures do not look before or after, but live in the animal eternity." We're having our own discussion about truth itself in the chat there. People with opinions who are being helped out and pointed towards the truth. So truth is being found in the very chat of this group. Wonderful. Anyway, Huxley says, "Non-rational creatures do not look before or after, but live in the animal eternity of a perpetual present. Instinct is their animal grace and constant inspiration, and they are never tempted to live otherwise than in accord with their own animal dharma, or immanent law. Thanks to his reasoning powers and to the instrument of reason, language, man in his merely human condition lives nostalgically, apprehensively and hopefully in the past and future as well as in the present. has no instincts to tell him what to do, must rely on personal cleverness rather than on inspiration from the divine nature of things, finds himself in a condition of chronic civil war between passion and prudence and, on a higher level of awareness and ethical sensibility, between egotism and dawning spirituality. But this wearisome condition of humanity is the indispensable prerequisite of enlightenment and deliverance. Man must live in time in order to be able to advance into eternity, no longer on the animal but on the spiritual level. He must be conscious of himself as a separate ego in order to be able consciously to transcend separate selfhood. He must do battle with the lower self in order that he may become identified with that higher self within him, which is akin to the divine not-self. And finally, he must make use of his cleverness in order to pass beyond cleverness, to the intellectual vision of truth, the immediate unitive knowledge of the divine ground. Reason and its works are not and cannot be a proximate means of union with God. The proximate means is intellect in the scholastic sense of the word or spirit. In the last analysis, the use and purpose of reason is to create the internal and external conditions favourable to its own transfiguration by and into spirit. It is the lamp by which it finds the way to go beyond itself. I don't know what you want explaining more, Joanne, because I was reading for a fair bit there before I've seen your comment. So if you can tell me what you'd like to explain more, I'll try my best. But we see then that as a means to approximate means to an end, discursive reasoning is of enormous value. But if, in our pride and madness, we treat it as a proximate means to the divine end, as so many religious people have done and still do, nothing profound, Joanne, just that Laura thought she learned from the BBC to say Scott. Laura said, I thought I was supposed to say Scott, not Scottish, and then you said they were wrong. So that's you've helped Laura to find truth, right? She thought, no offense or disrespect Laura, but Laura thought that she should say Scott, and you said no, it's Scottish. So then Laura has found the truth in that instance, about this term, Scot or Scottish. You've helped her to find the truth. So that's what I was saying about truth in the chat, you guys chatting. So it's very nice. Where was I? I'll read that bit again because it's, like you say, very deep. We see then that as a means to approximate means to an end, discursive reasoning is of enormous value. But if, in our pride and madness, we treat it as a proximate means to the divine end, as so many religious people have done and still do, or if, denying the existence of an eternal end, we regard it as once the means to progress and its ever-receding goal in time, cleverness becomes the enemy, a source of spiritual blindness, moral evil and social disaster. And no period in history has cleverness. I'm glad to hear that, guys. Don't worry, Joanne, just ask again and I'll explain it. I'm glad we're all still friends after that. And at no time have intellectual... Oh, here we go. At no period in history has cleverness been so highly valued or, in certain directions, so widely and efficiently trained as at the present time. and at no time have intellectual vision and spirituality been less esteemed, or the end to which they are proximate means less widely and less earnestly sought for. Because technology advances, we fancy that we are making corresponding progress all along the line. Because we have considerable power over inanimate nature, we are convinced that we are the self-sufficient masters of our fate and captains of our souls. And because cleverness has given us technology and power, we believe, in spite of all the evidence on the contrary, that we have only to go on being yet cleverer in a yet more systematic way to achieve social order, international peace, and personal happiness. And so this part, I didn't understand the first part myself about means and ends, but it's a very interesting point that Huxley makes here. He's saying that, because technology is advancing and we're having more control over nature, and we think we're better than the people of 1,000 and 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, we're missing out on the perennial philosophy, the truth in all the religions. So that's a very interesting bit. And this is another quote from Wu Cheng En from Monkey. So we're going to get into that now. And like I say, it's another profound, it's a storybook, Monkey, fiction, but it's on the shelf if you guys are interested. So here we go. Huxley says, in Wu Cheng En's extraordinary masterpiece, so admirably translated by Mr. Arthur Waley, there is an episode at once comical and profound in which Monkey, who in the allegory is the incarnation of human cleverness, gets to heaven and there causes so much trouble that at last Buddha has to be called in to deal with him. It ends in the following passage. Which part, Laura? I don't... I was just commenting on Huxley's bit there about the future and how we think we're so clever, but really we've come so far away from, the spiritual truths. Yeah, sorry. This is a quote from the book Monkey by Wu Cheng En. I'll have a wager with you, said Buddha. If you are really so clever, jump off the palm of my right hand. If you succeed, I'll tell the Jade Emperor to come and live with me in the Western Paradise, and you shall have his throne without more ado. But if you fail, you shall go back to earth and do a penance for many a kalpa before you come back to me with your talk. This Buddha, Monkey thought to himself, is a perfect fool. I can jump 108,000 leagues, while his palm cannot be as much as 8 inches across. How could I fail to jump clear of it? You're sure you're in a position to do this for me? He asked. Of course I am, said Buddha. He stretched out his right hand, which looked about the size of a lotus leaf. Monkey put his cudgel behind his ear and leapt with all his might. That's all right, he said to himself. I'm right of it now. He was whizzing so fast that he was almost invisible, and Buddha, watching him with the eye of wisdom, saw a mere whirligig shoot along. Monkey came at last to 5 pink pillars sticking up into the air. This is the end of the world, said Monkey to himself. All I have got to do is go back to Buddha and claim my forfeit. The throne is mine. Wait a minute, he said presently. I'd better just leave a record of some kind in case I have trouble with Buddha. He plucked a hair and blew on it with magic breath, crying, Change! It changed at once into a writing brush charged with heavy ink, and at the base of the central pillar he wrote, The great sage equal to heaven reached this place. Then, to mark his disrespect, he relieved nature at the bottom of the first pillar and somersaulted back to where he had come from. Standing on Buddha's palm, he said, Well, I've gone and come back. You can go and tell the Jade Emperor to hand over the palaces of heaven. You stinking ape, said the Buddha. You've been on the palm of my hand all the time. You're quite mistaken, said Monkey. I got to the end of the world where I saw 5 flesh-coloured pillars sticking up into the sky. I wrote something on one of them. I'll take you there and show you if you like." "No need for that," said Buddha. "Just look down." Monkey peered down with his fiery, steely eyes, and there at the base of the middle finger of the Buddha's hand he saw written the words, "The great sage equal to heaven reached this place," and from the fork between the thumb and the first finger came the smell of a monkey's urine. End quote from the monkey. And so, having triumphantly urinated on the proffered hand of wisdom, the monkey within us turns back and, full of a bumptious confidence in his own omnipotence, sets out to refashion the world of men and things into something nearer to his heart's desire. Sometimes his intentions are good, sometimes consciously bad. But whatever the intentions may be, the results of action undertaken by even the most brilliant cleverness, when it is unenlightened by the divine nature of things, unsubordinated to the spirit, are generally evil. That this has always been clearly understood by humanity at large is proved by the usages of language. Cunning and canny are equivalent to knowing, and all three adjectives pass a more or less unfavourable moral judgment on those to whom they are applied. Conceit is just Conceit is just concept, but what a man's mind conceives most clearly is the supreme value of his own ego. Shrewd, which is the participle form of shrew, meaning malicious, and is connected with beshrew, to curse, is now applied, by way of rather dubious compliment, to astute businessmen and attorneys. Wizards are so called because they are wise. Wise, of course, in the sense that, in American slang, a wise guy is wise. Conversely, an idiot was once popularly known as an innocent. This use of innocent, says Richard Trent, assumes that to hurt and harm is the chief employment towards which men turn their intellectual powers, that where they are oftenest wise to do evil. Meanwhile, it goes without saying that cleverness and accumulated knowledge are indispensable, but always as means to proximate means, and never as proximate means, or, what is even worse, as ends in themselves. What would learning do without love? It would puff up, and love without learning, it would go astray. And here we have some more quotes. Quote, "Such as men themselves are, such will God himself seem to them to be." Wow. It's a powerful quote, in it, from John Smith the Platonist. I'll repeat it. "Such as men themselves are, such will God himself seem to them to be." So John Smith the Platonist is saying whatever one believes God is, it sort of reflects who you are. So very interesting. Sorry, I got distracted. Another quote. "Men's minds perceive second causes, but only prophets perceive the action of the first cause." And that quote's from Jalaluddin Rumi. Back to Huxley. "The amount and kind of knowledge we acquire depends first upon the will, and second upon our psychophysical constitution and the modifications imposed upon it by environment and our own choice. Thus, Professor Burkitt has pointed out that, where technological discovery is concerned, man's desire has been the important factor. Once something is definitely wanted, again and again it has been produced in an extremely short time. Conversely, nothing will teach the Bushmen of South Africa to plant and herd. They have no desire to do so. The same is true in regard to ethical and spiritual discoveries. 'You are as holy as you wish to be,' was the motto given by Rosebrook to the students who came to visit him, and he might have added, 'You can therefore know as much of reality as you wish to know. For knowledge is in the knower according to the mode of the knower, and the mode of the knower is, in certain all-important respects, within the knower's control.' Liberating knowledge of God comes to the pure in heart and poor in spirit, and though such purity and poverty are enormously difficult of achievement, they are nevertheless possible to all. And we have another quote, some more quotes here. This quote is from the Testament of St. Catherine of Siena, written down by Tommaso di Petra. Quote, "She said, moreover, that if one would attain to purity of mind, it was necessary to abstain altogether from any judgment on one's neighbour and from all empty talk about his conduct. In creatures one should always seek only for the will of God. With great force, she said, for no reason whatever should one judge the actions of creatures or their motives. Even when we see that it is an actual sin, we ought not to pass judgment on it, but have holy and sincere compassion and offer it up to God with humble and devout prayer." So anyone who struggles with judgment and judgment, that's a great quote to focus on. This total abstention from judgment upon one's fellows is the only one of the conditions of inward purity. The others have already been described in the section on mortification. Another quote, "Learning consists in adding to one's stock day by day. The practice of Tao consists in subtracting day by day, subtracting and yet again subtracting, until one has reached inactivity." That quote's from Lao Tzu. It is the inactivity of self-will and ego-centered cleverness that makes possible the activity within the emptied and purified soul of the eternal suchness. And when eternity is known in the heights within, it is also known in the fullness of experience outside in the world. And we end this section on truth with a quote from Peter Sterry, whoever that is. So this is the final quote of the evening. If you have any questions or things to share, do that now, because we'll be ending very shortly. Quote, "Didst thou ever descry a glorious eternity in a winged moment of time? Didst thou ever see a bright infinite in the narrow point of an object? Then thou knowest what spirit means, the spire top, whither all things ascend harmoniously, where they meet and sit contented in an unfathomed depth of life." And that quote's from Peter Sterry, and I didn't understand a word of that, if I'm honest with you. So that was chapter 7 on truth, and the next chapter, chapter 8, is on religion and temperament. And I think we're not quite there. We're almost halfway through the book. And so tomorrow night at 9, we'll read chapter 8, Religion and Temperament. And I don't know if you guys saw on the channel, I did a video about what book next. Sunday night, we're going to be taking a break from, as Joanne says often, the deep words of Aldous Huxley. We're going to take a little break from Aldous Huxley, and there's a poll and also a video that you guys can check out. Be sure to vote if you haven't yet. You can choose from Black Beauty, Treasure Island, The Secret Garden, or The Hunger Games. Nearly lost it. My accent, Laura. I suppose you're asking me, yeah, because I'm the one talking. I grew up just outside London, in a place called Harrow, and I don't know where it's come from. Lots of people say, who I meet just randomly, they might say New Zealand or Australia. But yeah, I grew up just outside London, and yeah, in a place called Harrow. I don't know where it's come from. Lots of people say I've got this weird accent. I think, yeah, maybe Harrow and some of the crowds I was in, quite urban. That's all I can think of. Got some urban twang going on. And then when I started reading for the channel, I tried to speak properly, the Queen's English. So all of that together, the urban younger days that I would grow up in Harrow, Ara, and also, yeah, some Cockney in there as well when I was drinking as a young man. So I suppose I've had lots of different influences, and this is what it has amounted to. But yeah, a lot of people, they enjoy my voice to fall asleep with. I've had several comments on my Lewis Kirk channel. They say, oh, thanks for the book, it made me fall asleep straight away. And so when people say that, I don't know whether it's an insult or a compliment, but I always take it as a compliment. No, don't worry about that, Laura. Yeah, I wouldn't say my accent fits in any one place. So you're not the first person to ask. And even some English people often ask, where are you from then? Where are you from? And I say, yeah, well, here, just up the road. So don't worry about that. But yeah, guys, for now, make sure you voted in the poll, because I'm looking forward to a bit of a change on Sunday evening, and I hope you guys are too, and that you'll be able to join me. Thank you, Joanne. That's very kind of you. But for now, until tomorrow night, guys, take care. Have a nice evening or a nice sleep if you're going to bed like I am. And I'll see you tomorrow night at 9. So have a good day. Take care, guys. Look after yourselves. And I'll see you tomorrow at 9. All right, guys. See you. Bye.